somewhere outside of Nashville, Tennessee. This is the award-winning podcast, ParaReality.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for listening tonight. My name, of course, is Sandman, and I will be your guide through this strange realm of ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, aliens, conspiracy theories, and other unsolved mysteries that I like to call ParaReality. Tonight, I'm going to be wrapping up my summer series on the Nazis. You know, I always get tons of positive feedback whenever I do a Nazi show, and this time is no different. Seems like there are a lot of people out there who, just like me, are fascinated by the occult practices of the Nazis and all of the weird stuff that they were into. Now, this is the second time that I've done a summer series about the Nazis, and it probably won't be the last either. Just when I think that I've covered almost every aspect of their occult practices and experiments and super secret inventions and stuff like that, I find that there's something else that I missed or something that I never even knew anything about at all. And then I'm like, oh, hey, this will make a great show. So here I go again. You know, I don't think that we'll ever really know everything that the Nazis were into because they did such a really good job at destroying all of the evidence. But on the other hand, they also kept excellent detailed records of everything that they did. So what they weren't able to destroy, it just left behind a wealth of information about it. And as well received as my Nazi episodes are, you'd think that I've done a ton of these episodes by now. In fact, 3 of the top 10 rated episodes of all time of ParaReality are actually about the Nazis, and the number 1 and number 2 spots are held by Nazi episodes. This is season 14 of the show, and I've recorded over 200 episodes, but really this is only the 9th episode that I've dedicated to the Nazis. So it's not like I've made an entire career out of talking about the Nazis, you know. However, when I do dedicate an episode to them, I always get a good response, so why stop, right? Now, I've read so much about the Nazis over the years, and I've watched so many documentaries about them that I'm now considering myself to be an expert in Nazi occult practices. That's a strange thing to be considered an expert in, right? But then again, look at the topics that I cover on this podcast. They're all strange. So why not, you know, be an expert in the occult practices and the weird stuff of Nazis? Why not, right? So on tonight's journey into the realm of ParaReality, I'm going to take you, my loyal listeners, along with me on another time-traveling journey back to Germany. We'll begin our adventure in Munich, Bavaria, Germany in the year 1900. A child was born to a housewife and a schoolmaster with a love of ancient life and archaeology. He was a frail, thin child with glasses who had difficulty making friends. In fact, he was bullied for most of his childhood, and as a result, he lived in a fantasy world fueled by his father's love of ancient civilizations. As he matured into a man, he kept these fantasies close to the vest, and eventually he somehow rose to a position of power in the Nazi Party. He then began to enact on these fantasies in a desperate attempt to rewrite German history into one that he wanted it to be, projecting his ideas and his fantasies onto the German people, thereby trying to have a weird attempt to rewrite German history and make it into something that he envisioned that it should be and guide it into the future. Now, the man I'm talking about is none other than Heinrich Himmler, And together tonight, loyal listener, we're going to be investigating his occult practices. And of course, to learn more, you'll have to tune in, and find out. But before we begin tonight's journey, loyal listener, let me tell you how you can contact me here at the podcast, because you know there are a few different ways that you can do it, and here they are. First, you can send me an email. My email address is sandman@parareality.com. That's sandman@parareality.com. Second, you can find me on Facebook just by going to the ParaReality page on Facebook. That's facebook.com/ParaReality. Third, you can follow me on Twitter. My username on Twitter is @ParaRealRadio. That's @ParaRealRadio. And lastly, you can always call me on the studio line. That number is area code 615, then dial 692-1170. That number again is 615-692-1170. Dial that number, leave me a message on the studio line. Now, I'm in the studio a lot working on the podcast, so you just might get me. I just might answer the phone. You never know. Probably not, but there's always that chance. And remember that if you do decide to call the studio line and leave me a message, that you are giving me permission to play your comment on the show. So if you don't want that to happen, you'll need to let me know somewhere in your message. And that number to call, once again, is 615-692-1170. Follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/ParaReality. Follow me on Twitter at ParaRealRadio, or send me an email, sandman@parareality.com. Also, you can just go to the website, www.parareality.com. Get in touch with me that way. Have a look around the website. Find out about all the latest paranormal news that's going on all around the world. Watch some show videos and shop in the ParaReality radio store and stuff like that. You know, I'm always looking for interesting stories for the podcast here. So if you have a story that you'd like to get on the show, call the studio line. Tell it to me over the voicemail if you'd like. There's a 3 or 4 minute time limit or something like that, I think. So if you run out of time, just call back and pick up where you left off. So those are all the different ways you can get in contact with me here on ParaReality. And I'll go over those again before the end of the show. Now it's that time of the show where we're going to get into some fan mail. And this comes from YouTube user, let me make sure I get this right, Groove King Muzz. YouTube user Groove King Muzz writes, this is regarding the Hollywood Starwhackers show that I did with Eric back last year sometime. I can't remember the exact date. I should have looked it up. But anyway, Groove King Muzz writes regarding the Hollywood Starwhackers, you need to research the subject a lot more before you give your final synopsis. You don't live out there, therefore you have no clue. Michael Jackson went through it. I'm not saying MJ was perfect. He was not. But naming the names Jackson did, Tommy Mottola, for example, was a bad idea. A power player with mob ties will not take kindly to venomous rhetoric. So they come at you with all their power and money behind it, and the Quades were arrested on bullshit charges. How do you squat in your own home? Come on, guys, more research into Quade's claims. Well, Groove King Muzz, I am sorry that we didn't research the show well enough for your liking. There just isn't a lot of information about the Starwhackers out there, or at least there wasn't at the time of that particular episode. Now, I've got no doubt that there are a lot of powerful people in Hollywood who manipulate things behind the scenes, but there's little proof that they have an actual secret society that meets regularly and plots the demise of certain people they don't like or see as a threat or something like that. Individual people in Hollywood, individual, power players out there doing that kind of stuff, yes, absolutely. And do those people recruit other people to help them? Probably so. I'd have to say probably most definitely so. But there's not enough evidence to prove that there's a secret group of people plotting to control Hollywood. But that's just my opinion, and you have yours, and I respect that. Somebody else also said in regards to the Hollywood Star Whackers episode that instead of trying to research Hollywood Star Whackers, I need to just do a search for like Hollywood suicides or something like that. And that is a good point, that I probably did need to expand my search instead of just particularly focusing on Hollywood Star Whackers. But really the person of interest on that episode was Randy Quaid, because he's the one that was calling them Hollywood Star Whackers. So I kind of focused my search more on Randy Quaid's claims of the Hollywood Star Whackers. I said I respect everyone's opinion. You've probably heard me say on this podcast many times before that I believe that your personal opinion is something that you can never be wrong on, because it's yours. It's your belief, what you think, what you feel. It's your opinion. So I don't think you can ever be wrong about what your opinion on something is. Can it be based on being misguided or wrong or incorrect information? Absolutely. But your opinion comes from within inside you, and that's something I don't think that you can ever be wrong with and be wrong in. And everyone has different opinions, and everyone can disagree about what the other person's opinion is, but I just think you need to do it respectfully. And I'm not saying that Gru King Muzz was being disrespectful, because I certainly don't get that feeling that he was trying to be disrespectful towards me or Eric. I'm just saying, I respect your opinion, and mine was what I had on the podcast, and if you don't like it, that's fine. If I don't like yours, that's fine too. It's not a big deal. But thanks for the feedback, Groove King Muzz, and maybe I will do a more in-depth look into Hollywood suicide. See what happens there. So that does it for this episode or this edition of Fan Mail. All right. Ooh. Here we go. Lost speaker control there for a second. Had a little glitch in the system, a glitch in the matrix, if you will. Well, that does it for this episode's fan mail. And, man, I've been off for a couple of weeks. By the time this episode airs, I'll have been off for 3 weeks. I just took some time to just relax and take care of a couple of things, and kind of gotta get my groove back on. It's good to be back in the ParaReality bunker, though, doing an episode. I miss it when I'm not doing it. It's such a big part of my life and such a big part of what I do, that when I don't do it for a couple of weeks, I start feeling like something's missing, and something is. The podcast. All right, let's talk about the occult beliefs of Heinrich Himmler. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones had to battle a group of Nazis whose mission was to find the Ark of the Covenant and find out what its power was and exploit that power for the good of the Nazi party. Now, that story may seem to be kind of like fantasy, especially considered that Nazism was officially non-religious, seems like there might be a little bit more truth to it than what you originally thought. The Nazis were obsessed with esoteric beliefs, especially when it comes to the occult. Some historians have even suggested that the occult formed the foundation of the Nazi movement. Both during the era of the Third Reich and since its decimation, people have had a lot to say about Hitler and his associates dabbling in these occult practices. Nazi symbology is just full of images and symbols from Eastern religions. For example, let's take the most famous Nazi emblem of all, the swastika. This is, you can't look at a swastika and not think about, white supremacy and the Aryan nation and Nazism and Hitler and stuff like that. But did you know that the swastika is actually derived from Sanskrit, and it's long been associated with well-being and good fortune? And this comes from different cultures like Indian Hindus and Buddhists. In fact, the word itself, swastika, is Sanskrit, and translated into English, it means good luck, well-being, or good existence, depending on how you want to translate it. But the fact, doesn't change, is that it was a symbol for good, and it meant good luck. And it's just one of the many symbols that was usurped by Hitler, possibly because of its links with esoteric religion and occult practices, and that, made its way into Europe. Now, what Hitler did with the swastika was he just kind of tilted it on its side a little bit. The swastika in itself is straight up and down, whereas the Nazis took it and skewed it a little bit to the left, where it's kind of crooked. Why he did that, I really don't know. But the swastika is actually a form of a religious cross, and it's always meant to be good luck. And it just goes to show how anybody can take something that has one meaning and make it mean whatever they want it to mean. And unfortunately, when it comes to stuff like this, and you have such an evil, twisted person like Hitler, he can take something that is good and it represents good and turn it into something evil. And now that's what it's known for, is the representation of evil. And that is not what it was intended to mean. As a matter of fact, I could take and go spray paint a right side up swastika that's not tilted on its side on the side of a building somewhere, and I would probably get my ass beat or worse if someone saw me doing it, because I'm a white man painting a swastika, and people are like, he's a white supremacist, racist bastard, and we have to kick his ass. When my intent would be, no, I'm doing it the correct way, and I mean this, I want this to mean good luck. So you have to be careful with stuff like that. Now, one of the top Nazi officials was Heinrich Himmler, the man in charge of the Schutzstaffel, or the SS, and Himmler was known to engage in occult practices. He followed the paganism of pre-Christian Germany, something that was strongly associated with the German nationalism of the Nazi regime, and actively involved in black magic. He tried to practice necromancy, which is the magical art of raising people from the dead, and frequently he held seances to try to contact the dead. The center of his occultic life was a place called Wewelsburg Castle in the Black Forest of northern Germany. At Wewelsburg, he and many other Nazi officials engaged in these occult practices. And we're going to take a look at not all of them, but we're going to take a look at some of them. And what I'm going to do is break this thing down into let's say 7 parts. 6 or 7 parts. Let's see. So I'm going to take this and break it down into, first of all, we're going to talk about Wewelsburg Castle. Then we're going to give you a brief biography of Himmler. Nothing comprehensive, but a pretty brief biography. Maybe you'll learn some stuff here. And then we're going to talk about some of his occult practices. We'll talk about the group, the Ahnenerbe, which a lot of you have heard of. And then we're going to talk about something that a lot of people might not know about, which is the special H unit that he formed. And after that, we'll talk about his capture and death. And I'll give you a little bit of a little-known Himmler conspiracy theory, and we'll wind up with part 7, part 6, which will be the conclusion. Did I get that right? Oh, gosh. So let's go over that one more time. Said I got to get my groove back. I've been off too long. So Wewelsburg Castle, and I'll give you a brief biography. Then we'll talk about the Ahnenerbe, the special H unit, his capture and death. I'll give you a little-known Himmler conspiracy theory and wind up with part 7, which will be the conclusion of it all. Whew, man, I swear to God, I've done this show before. So let's start off with part 1. Let's take a brief look at Wewelsburg Castle. Now, after Himmler took over Wewelsburg, he tried to establish it as an SS training ground. As I just mentioned, Wewelsburg Castle was in the Black Forest of northern Germany. And he actually, when he took possession of this castle, and it's not a huge castle by any stretch of the means, but it's beautiful. It's kind of in the shape of a triangle. And when he took possession of this, he basically built it up with slave labor, captured or enslaved Jews, and built this thing up into this grand SS training ground, for lack of a better effort. He wanted this to be the heart or the home of the SS, and he wanted this to be an elite training ground. And unfortunately for him, this effort ultimately proved to be unsuccessful. So then he used it to train SS officers in much more narrower areas, namely medieval folklore, pre-Christian Germanic history, genealogy, which he did that to propagate the Aryan myth of German descent, which has long since been refuted, FYI. And he wanted them to participate in teaching and carrying out black magic. Wewelsburg Castle had a scientific library, which made the work done there look like it had a solid factual basis. And because Himmler and his beliefs, the occult was at the heart of much of SS activity during the years of the Third Reich. In addition to being used as a research center, Wewelsburg was the center of archaeological excavations in the northern part of Germany. There's a team of SS scientists that was based out of Wewelsburg, and they used archaeology to try to understand pre-Christian and medieval German history better to further the buttress of the Nazi worldview. Their findings and the claims that they had resulting from their findings, many of which cannot be independently substantiated, by the way, were used to build up that scientific library at Wewelsburg. They were also used to educate the people in the nearby villages about the Nazi worldview and its alleged historical and scientific basis. However, in addition to all of these things, Heinrich Himmler had to position Wewelsburg Castle so that it would symbolically be at the center of the world after the Nazis got finished reshaping it. His purpose was really simple. He believed that a giant apocalyptic battle would be fought in the vicinity, and he wanted to use black magic to ensure victory for the Nazi regime. Himmler's infatuation with sorcery and the occult practices definitely added I guess you could say, a colorful flavor to the regime's ideology. As the leader of the SS, he was a close friend and confidant of the Fuhrer, Adolf Hitler, and thereby shaped the views of the entire Nazi party. Now, let's take a brief biography of Heinrich Himmler. Himmler inherited his passion for ancient history and for scientific classification from his schoolmaster father, Gebhard. Gebhard Himmler had majored in philosophy at university, philology at university. This is a discipline defined this was an 1882 definition as defined by the Athenaeum as, and I quote, a master science whose duty is to present to us the whole of ancient life and to give archaeology its just place by the side of literature. Gebhard Himmler took a strong hand in the education of his children. Oftentimes in the evening, he and his wife would read aloud to his children from books on German history or from the sagas of the medieval European bards. And young Heinrich, he grew to love the old tales of savage violence and vengeance. Steeped in dark medieval lore, he had studiously memorized the details of Germany's most famous battles by the time he was only 10 years old. And in high school, his knowledge of ancient weaponry and warfare rivaled that of his teachers, as a matter of fact. Now, he didn't make friends very easily, as you can imagine. He spent part of his childhood in a small town outside of Munich, where his dad, his father, Gebhard Himmler, was a deputy headmaster at the local school. Now, the students there discovered that Heinrich regularly reported their schoolyard pranks to his father, which resulted in them having stern disciplinary actions levied against them. So the other boys shunned him, and they would go silent whenever he would walk up to them, and as soon as he rounded the corner or was out of earshot, they resumed their conversations. And rather than make amends or try to make friends with these guys, Heinrich was determined to get the upper hand by supervising the after-class punishments that his father liberally doled out to these kids. As you can imagine, this did not sit well with the kids in his school. He didn't make friends easily. He was bullied as well as shunned. He was a thin, frail kind of kid with glasses, and things just really didn't go well for him. And it was really mainly because of his own devices. Now, on vacations, Gebhard took his sons to visit archaeological and historical sites. Together, they searched for rune stones to read and collected coins and small artifacts to take back home and study. And archaeology was, at least at the time, it was largely a science of classification. Its disciples sought to identify and sort artifacts into precisely defined categories, and that was viewed as an important step toward making sense of objects recovered from the ground. And Gebhard followed suit, classifying the family's collection of artifacts and organizing them into a filing system that he set up in a special room in their Munich apartment. Now, young Heinrich, he relished this process of turning the chaos of ancient life into a rigid, unbending order, and the pleasure he took from it seems to have stayed with him his entire life. Under his direction, concentration camp officials later issued prisoners color-coded badges so that the prisoners could be classified just at a glance into one of 18 precise categories, from political prisoners to gypsies. Now, at his father's behest, Heinrich also developed an almost fanatical devotion to organization. He often noted in his diary the exact time of day, sometimes down to the exact minute, when he received letters and birthday greetings from friends and family members. He recorded the precise time his train departed from his station, like he was training to become some sort of an inspector or something, and he kept a lengthy list of all the books he read, often writing down the dates he started and finished each book, followed by a little brief synopsis, neatly encapsulating his response to what he read. It seemed like everything for Heinrich was something that was to be observed, documented, organized, and neatly categorized. By his late teens, however, he kind of was getting a little stifled under his father's iron grip, and World War I had ended in Germany's defeat, obviously, and leaving the German economy in ruins at the time. So young Heinrich was eager to escape to a simpler world. So he decided to study agriculture, and he enrolled in what's now called the Technical University of Munich. While he was there, he developed an intense personal interest in breeding livestock, both animal and human. To Heinrich, who was a born micromanager, it was really one way of perfecting an increasingly imperfect and troubled modern world, the way that he saw it. Around this time, he fully embraced right-wing political extremism, and he joined the Nazi Party in the summer of 1923. And when the first volume of Hitler's manifesto, his book Mein Kampf, came out 2 years later, he just fell on it like a starving man, read it from cover to cover, couldn't get enough of it. So Heinrich was really struck by Hitler's ideas on the origins of the German people. The Nazi Party leader believed that many of his countrymen could trace at least part of their ancestry to a primordial master race, the Aryans, who had brought civilization to a primitive world. This was, of course, pure fiction, but Hitler, man, he employed it skillfully to stroke German vanity. As a matter of fact, Hitler said that all human culture, all the results of art, science, and technology that we see before us today are almost exclusively the creative product of the Aryan. And that is a direct quote from Adolf Hitler. So the world had lost its spark of genius, Hitler thought. And when the Aryans married into lesser races, they diluted their superior blood and therefore caused their own demise. Now, this is all what Hitler's saying. So Heinrich found these ideas of a lost Aryan golden age really appealing. He had a long history of soaking up tales from his dad of, feudal lords and kings and soldiers and pheasants, Teutonic knights and Roman emperors, and he loved this kind of stuff. Actually, nearly a third of the books that he had read since his teenage years were about historical subjects. And in the charismatic person that Adolf Hitler was, he believed that he had found at last someone who shared his passion for the past. And Hitler saw something appealing in Himmler as well. He saw a deep, unwavering fervor and a blind obedience to his authority that he demanded of all the members of his inner circle. Heinrich Himmler, who had served the party well as a young election campaigner, also showed signs of organizational genius. So in January 1929, Hitler placed him at the head of the Schutzstaffel, or the SS, the elite bodyguard that Hitler had formed 4 years earlier. However, the SS had failed to live up to Hitler's expectations, and he thought it was time for a major shakeup. So Himmler was hungry to succeed in this new post, and he began reorganizing the SS from top to bottom. And he ended the chaotic group meetings where the SS members would basically they just gathered about and just lounged around, not really doing anything except smoking and drinking and telling stories about all the communist people that they had beat up. So with Heinrich Himmler at the helm of the SS, the members went from that to doing brisk military drills before each meeting. And then they would sing SS songs, and they listened to the political speeches that consumed most of the meetings. And by the end of 1931, the SS boasted 10,000 members, with stacks of new applications arriving daily. So you see, Heinrich Himmler had a skill for organization that probably was a direct result of the influence of his father, Gebhard. And he adored Hitler so much and believed in what he was doing so much that he eventually made his way into the watchful eye of Adolf Hitler. Hitler saw in Himmler something that stood out from everyone else, which was his devotion and his ability to organize and micromanage. And that's what Hitler really needed. He needed somebody like that, because Hitler was not one of those people. Even though he demanded blind obedience and unwavering just unwavering obedience of his followers, he was not his leadership style was kind of laissez-faire. He would stay up late at night into the wee hours of the morning, sleep half the day, get up, lounge around, maybe have breakfast or brunch or whatever it was, depending on what time of day he got up. And then he would go into the office in the afternoon and run the country for a few hours. But what he needed was someone who was going to be the opposite of him. And in Heinrich Himmler, he found that. And so Heinrich Himmler becomes basically, you can say what you want, but Himmler was basically Hitler's right-hand man. You can say that all about Göring and all that sorts of stuff, but he was really the right-hand man. So you come to the part now to where we have to start talking about what did he do with his beliefs, all these occult beliefs that he had. So one of the first things that he did was form a group called the Ahnenerbe. And Himmler wanted SS recruits to think and live like their ancestors had. So on July 31st, 1935, Himmler founded a new SS research institute to reconstruct all aspects of primeval German culture. Now, officially, the name of this group was, and I'm going to totally slaughter this, I'm going to try it in German. Feel free to laugh and make fun of me all you want. The official name of the group was the Deutsche Ahnenerbe Studiengesellschaft für Geistesurgeschichte. And that is not how you pronounce it, but that is as close as I can get it. The translation from that poorly worded German means German Ancestral Heritage Society for the Study of the History of Primeval Ideas. That's a mouthful, either way you say it. But most people just simply call it the Ahnenerbe. Now, they had the strange purpose of finding, quote-unquote, evidence that linked German ancestry to the Aryan master race, who were believed to have come from the long-lost advanced civilizations. Ahnenerbe research included everything from like archaeological expeditions to witchcraft to psychic research and macabre human experiments. In 1939, Himmler relocated the headquarters of the rapidly growing institute into a grand villa in one of Berlin's wealthiest neighborhoods and secured ample funding for it. In other words, he just kind of did it on his own. He equipped it with laboratories, libraries, museum workshops, and he personally supervised the operation of the Ahnenerbe. At its peak before the war, the Ahnenerbe had 137 German scholars and scientists on its payroll, and many of whom possessed doctorates and taught classes at some of the most prestigious German universities. At Himmler's urging, the staff studied a broad range of subjects from ancient Germanic building styles to old Nordic horse breeds and primeval musical instruments. Just weird stuff. And Himmler even asked the Ahnenerbe researchers to study the sexual practices of ancient Germanic tribes. Now, this was probably so he could develop some sort of guidelines for his SS troops to have sexual relations and sire offspring. It's just, Nazi version of porn, I guess. I don't know. So by 1940, Himmler had incorporated the Ahnenerbe into the SS, or the Schutzstaffel. And one of the many beliefs that Himmler had was that he himself was a reincarnation of a medieval king named Henrich the Fowler. Now, some sources claimed that he developed the SS into an order of knights, kind of like a perverted form of the Knights of the Round Table, and that he used Wewelsburg Castle as the new Camelot and the center of a new pagan religion. And I find that to be highly credible as far as what he was trying to do. Now, to give this new religion an Aryan ancestry credence, the Ahnenerbe became key in establishing a new interpretation of the past. The basis of their research stemmed from the theories of German occultists. The most popular was the world ice theory, which I did not too long ago. And just a brief synopsis of that, the world ice theory proposed that numerous moons made of ice had at one time orbited the Earth and been in our solar system, and one by one they crashed into the Earth, causing separate cataclysmic events, one of those which caused the destruction of Atlantis. Now, that was in the previous episode of, or a previous episode of this summer series here on Nazis. So I did the world ice theory and the hollow earth theory. And if you haven't heard those yet, you need to go back and listen to those as well so you get caught up. Now, according to various occultists, godlike beings called Aryans, described as a Nordic race, escaped Atlantis and spread across the earth. German occultists believed the German people were the purest representatives of this master race, which Himmler would use as an excuse for Nazis to exterminate and rule over the lower races, as he put it. And as such, only Aryan people were capable of civilization, and Himmler manipulated scientific research through the Ahnenerbe to promote belief in this pseudo-scientific theory of his. Now, initially, studies were confined to ancient texts, rock art, runes, and folk studies and stuff like that. Folk studies were behind one of the early expeditions to find evidence of witchcraft, believe it or not. And that leads us into the Special H unit, which is something that I don't think a lot of you have ever heard of when it comes to Himmler and the SS and his occult beliefs. So in June 1936, as part of his study of witchcraft, Himmler sent a young Finnish nobleman by the name of Eero von Gronhagen to Finland. Now, Gronhagen impressed Himmler with his articles on Kalevala folklore, with his expertise that he possessed, and he scoured the Finnish countryside for evidence. He brought along a musicologist to record pagan chants, and they filmed a witch that was performing a ritual, and this witch said that she had foretold of the Nazis' arrival. Who knows whether it's true or not, but that's what she said. So Himmler, who despised the Judeo-Christian religion, he hoped to obtain pagan incantations and rituals to be used as part of his planned pagan religion. And later he set up the SS Witches Division, and they investigated the persecution of pagan wise women, quote unquote, at the hands of Jews and Catholics. A team of 17 SS officers worked secretly for a unit called the Special Assignment H Unit, and H is for Haxen, which in German means witches, and they carried out a project that was ordered directly by Heinrich Himmler and overseen by an SS officer. His name was Rudolf Levin. Now, the SS Witches Division was set up to try to find evidence that witches had existed and had been hunted to death by the Jews in a twisted attempt to justify the Nazi hatred of the Jewish people. The SS Witches Division searched across Eastern Europe throughout the Second World War for evidence that witches, referred to as wise women, were persecuted through a Jewish Catholic Inquisition. In a bizarre claim, the SS Witches Division alleged that the witches had been, and I quote, of pure German blood, and Himmler was convinced witches had once been rife in Eastern Europe and not just in folklore, that they were real. And the special division, which consisted mainly of young men in their 20s, they plowed daily through stacks of execution reports sent in from around the country, and they carefully tabulated the essentials on note cards specially designed for this purpose. Now, what exactly was the information they were collecting? Well, in essence, members of the special unit were compiling information on individuals who had been accused of magic and witchcraft centuries earlier. In other words, the unit's objective involved assembling, at Himmler's behest, a kind of a database of all known witchcraft trials and executions. And apparently, over the course of the mid to late 1930s, the Special H Unit combed archives and libraries all across Germany and other countries to create over 33,000 index cards, together with supporting documentation, as well as a huge library on witchcraft. The Special H Unit was rooted in Nazi ideological obsessions with race and, to use Himmler's own words, Germany's so-called eternal foes, the Jews. in Himmler's distorted and racial vision or version of history, the Jews had played a role throughout the centuries in torturing and killing tens of thousands of German mothers and daughters through the process of witchcraft trials, and he was determined to demonstrate this scientifically. Himmler's claims had their roots in the views of Alfred Rosenberg, who was the Nazi Party's main ideologue and author of the infamous book called The Myth of the 20th Century, which he wrote in 1930. Now, this was it's a near unreadable book, which is often seen as one of the main racial, quote-unquote, Bibles of the Third Reich, second only to Hitler's Mein Kampf, which was penned in 1924. Now, Rosenberg had put a lot of energy into promoting what you can call the racialization of the witch craze in German history, showing complete contempt for the established scholarly view of witches and the past in Germany. Rosenberg instead falsified history and alleged that the Jews, through their witch hunting, had carried out a form of genocide against German womanhood. Now, Himmler was influenced by Rosenberg's work, and so he set up the Special Assignment H Unit as a supposedly scientific unit to analyze the political, social, and economic causes and consequences of the witch trials. Now, although Rudolf Levin, who was the head of the Special Assignment H Unit, although he appeared determined to keep the project afloat when war broke out, like, for example, he had lots of plans for new publications, including a picture book series on witches and devils, which is really weird. So he was determined to keep this project afloat. But when the war broke out, Himmler's priorities shifted onto more pressing aspects of the Third Reich's anti-Semitism, such like, the final solution. So in February of 1943, the special unit was officially suspended on the grounds that it wasn't conducting work essential to the war, which makes sense because it wasn't. Now, compared to most other SS endeavors, the Special Assignment H Unit and its witch project was, it's really naive and it's laughable. However, what it also demonstrates to chilling and frightening effect was how Nazi ideology was intent on proving German racial superiority against the supposed machinations of the Jews in the past, ruthlessly exploiting scholarly and scientific methods. So Himmler, knowing the work that the Ahnenerbe and the Special H Unit was doing was basically bunk. Excuse me while I grab something to drink here. Knowing that this was not necessarily valid and true information, he was still intent on making it true. He wanted to rewrite German history into what he thought it should be, that he was going to ignore what the truth was, and simply by believing it to be true, he was making it true in his twisted viewpoint. So now we're going to move on to the part where we talk about Himmler's capture and death. Now, he was present in the Berlin bunker to celebrate the Fuhrer's last birthday on April 20th, 1945. It was the final time that he saw Hitler. Himmler then spent several days wandering through Germany. He apparently had not made any prior plans for himself because there's no evidence that can be found of Himmler having written any letters or preparing a suicide plot, and he had decided he didn't wish to die in battle either. He was just aimlessly wandering through Germany, I guess, trying to come up with a plan. I don't know. His realization that the Allies would somehow secure safe passage for him from Germany was, well, it was a false hope, and I'm sure it was a tough blow to his ego. And in accordance with what we know of his personality, Himmler probably lacked the necessary decisiveness to hand himself over as a prisoner, as Göring had done. And he believed he would be hunted as a war criminal. And he's probably right, because if he wasn't going to hand himself over and say, okay, I submit, I throw myself at the mercy of the Allies, he would have been hunted down. Absolutely no question about it. Now, on May 11th, 1945, Himmler traded in his glasses for an eye patch, shaved off his mustache, and disguised himself as a Sergeant Heinrich Himmler. And he began traveling through the country without any kind of apparent pattern or reason. He left Flensburg in the far northern in the far northern German state of Schleswig-Holstein for Friedrichskoog to the southwest. And ironically, now look at the name that he switched to. This is his narcissism kicking in here. His narcissism was so strong that his false name bore the same initials to his given name, HH, and he kept his first name too, Heinrich. So why would you do that? But just narcissism is the only thing I can think of. Himmler was captured with his two escorts at a checkpoint near Bremerfjord on May 21st. So he had a month there where he was like running scared, I guess. Himmler presented his suspiciously false papers, and his escorts, they say, kept glancing back to check that he was still with them, making it very obvious to the British patrol that captured him that something weird was going on there. And so Himmler and his party, his bodyguards, were taken to the British Second Army headquarters in Barnstedt in Lower Saxony. And when word came to one Captain Tom Sylvester that there were three men insisting to see the officer in charge, he had them brought to him. Now, Sylvester saw through Himmler's disguise. He recognized him immediately. And upon being seated, in a very quiet voice, without even being asked, this little tiny, thin, disheveled man, with his head held down low, merely said, "Heinrich Himmler." Didn't even have to be asked who he was. The men were searched, but their British captors were not certain. They had found all of the poison on Himmler's person after finding only a vial in the lining of his jacket. Now, Company Sergeant Major Edwin Austin was present that night, acting as an interpreter. And Sergeant Major Austin ordered Himmler to get undressed, to which Himmler indignantly said from behind an army blanket that he was covered up with, "He does not know who I am." And Austin assured Himmler that he was aware of his identity and repeated his order. Himmler was inspected thoroughly, and when the medical officer who was inspecting him came to his mouth, that's when Himmler acted. Himmler drew his head away and clamped down on the doctor's finger, bit on the doctor's finger and crushed a vial of poison that he had hidden in one of his teeth. I guess it was a false tooth or something like that. He had carried this cyanide capsule for, I guess, maybe the whole time he had been a fugitive on the run, and just waiting for the right and most dramatic moment to take his own life. So on May 23rd, 1945, Heinrich Himmler, chief of the SS, assistant chief of the Gestapo, and architect of Hitler's program to exterminate European Jews, dies by suicide only one day after being arrested by the British. Or did he? Let's take a look at the Heinrich Himmler conspiracy theory. History states that Heinrich Himmler bit on a cyanide tablet that was embedded in one of his teeth and died as a result of this. Himmler, after the death of Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, was probably the most prized catch out of all the senior figures in Nazi Germany. Like I said, he didn't possess the guts to turn himself in. So he would have been sought as a war crimes criminal. However, there's a guy named Martin Allen who's done some research on Heinrich Himmler, and he questions the traditional story of Himmler dying by suicide. He claims that Himmler was killed by British intelligence to stop any chance of his interwar peace dealings with the Allies from being made public. These covert dealings actually started in 1943 at a time when publicly the Allies were calling for the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. Any revelations about clandestine peace deals with one of the most notorious men in Nazi Germany would have been highly embarrassing for the British government. So in 1941, Churchill established the Political Warfare Executive, the PWE. Its function was to broadcast propaganda into Nazi Germany to undermine the leadership there. As part of this work, the PWE tried to set off one, senior Nazi official against the other. And it was known in the PWE that the majority of senior Nazi figures had little time or little consideration or little concern for others in the Nazi hierarchy, and that all of them simply wanted to advance their own power base at the expense of who the hell ever. This belief was confirmed by one Albert Speer in his post-war autobiography called Inside the Third Reich. From 1943 on, Himmler had made contact with British intelligence in an effort to end the war from the Allies' point of view. What Himmler is said to have envisioned was the Allies combining their military might with the Germans with one target in mind, and that was Stalin's Russia. It's said that Himmler had decided that Germany would suffer defeat in the war after the Battle of Stalingrad. In March 1943, Himmler sent SS General Walter Schellenberg to Sweden, where he was to have contacted Victor Mallet, who was the British ambassador in Sweden. Now, Mallet had very little intention of dealing with Himmler, but he was told that he must do so by the PWE. And they also told him to actively encourage more meetings and more contact. So it seems that the PWE's plan was to completely destabilize the Nazi hierarchy within Germany, which would precipitate an early surrender. In October 1943, the PWE received a 6-point peace plan from Himmler, who seemed to believe that he was dealing directly with senior officials at British intelligence. Himmler stated that peace would lead to German troops being pulled out of occupied Western Europe, and that an independent and free Poland would once again come into being. In return, he wanted assurances that there would be no Allied invasion of Western Europe and that the Allied bombing of Germany would stop. The head of the PWE at the time, a man named Brendan Bracken, wrote the following, and I quote, "Of course, HH's proposal is unrealistic, but it also reveals how desperate the top men of the Nazi regime believe their military situation to be." Now, towards the end of the war, Himmler openly made overtures of peace to the Allies, much to the fury, as you can imagine, of Hitler, who ordered him to be arrested. His arrest put PWE in a very difficult position. Churchill had set up the PWE to send out propaganda to Nazi Germany, and Churchill had been a very vocal supporter of non-negotiation with the Nazis, and he had always made it clear that he wanted an unconditional surrender from the Nazis. Yet here was this shadowy organization set up by Churchill himself doing exactly what Churchill said the Allies would not do, negotiate with Nazi leaders. So any show trial of Himmler that might have been put on may well have brought up some other issues that Churchill didn't want known. So the death camps were known about in London. RAF intelligence photos and information provided by the Polish underground movement provided all of this info. So why didn't the PWE use its potential influence over Himmler to either stop the transport trains to the camps or at least reduce the flow of Jews into the camps? Also, if Himmler could have pulled off a change in leadership as a result of his contact with British intelligence, how many Allied lives might have been saved from D-Day onwards? Would the Red Army have gotten as far into Eastern Europe as they did in Berlin? And America knew nothing about what the PWE had been doing with Himmler. So if Himmler stood trial, all this would come out into the open, and it might undermine any case against him as well. So Mr. Bracken, again, said in a letter, and I quote, "The truth would have devastating repercussions for this country's standing." Now, at the Public Records Office in Kew, London, Martin Allen found a note dated May 10th, 1945, from a man named John Wheeler Bennett at the Foreign Office to Robert Bruce Lockhart at the PWE. And the note was marked personal and a secret. And here's what it says: "We cannot allow Himmler to take the stand in any prospective prosecution or indeed allow him to be interrogated by the Americans. Steps will therefore have to be taken to eliminate him as soon as he falls into our hands. Please give the matter some thought, as, if we are to take action, we will have to expedite such an act with some haste. I have arranged for Mr. Thomas to go for a fortnight." So what happens next is open to interpretation. So Allen has found a coded telegram in a foreign office at Kew, and it is from a Mr. Thomas, who was the person that was arranged to go for a fortnight. And this is what this telegram states: "Further to my orders, we successfully intercepted H.H. last night at Lüneburg before he could be interrogated. As instructed, action was taken to silence him permanently." So you can only assume here that H.H. was Heinrich Himmler. So whatever happened there, a dead Himmler, according to Allen, could not embarrass the government. So did Himmler kill himself to cheat the hangman, or was he actually killed by British intelligence and then buried in an unmarked grave so that no autopsy could ever be carried out? Or was the man a double for Himmler, as some people have stated, who, this guy died in Himmler's stead while, the SS leader escaped justice? I think that just based upon all of these notes, letters, and telegrams, that it is a very, very safe assumption to say that Heinrich Himmler did not kill himself by biting down on a vial of poison, a vial of cyanide, that he might have been given that cyanide forcefully by British intelligence. As everything that I personally have read and discovered about Heinrich Himmler is actually just the opposite of someone who would take their own life. I don't believe that that man possessed the courage or the intestinal fortitude, as they say, to do that. Because to kill yourself, it really does take a lot of guts. Hitler did it. Now, does that mean Hitler was a brave man? No. It just means that he had the guts to do it. I don't think that Himmler possessed that kind of moxie about himself. I think he was really too much of a coward to take his own life. I really think that he probably, right up until the moment that he was killed, was thinking, I'm going to get myself out of this, and I'm going to maintain some sort of power in Germany. That's really what I think. So, in conclusion here, as the head of the Waffen-Schatzstaffel, the military arm of the Nazi Party, and an assistant chief of the Gestapo, which was the secret police, Heinrich Himmler was able, over time, to consolidate his control over all police forces of the Reich. The power he would ultimately wield would rival that of the German army. It would also prove highly effective in eliminating all opposition to Hitler and the Nazi Party, as well as in carrying out the Fuhrer's final solution. It was Himmler who organized the creation of the death camps throughout Eastern Europe and a pool of slave laborers. Heinrich Himmler's megalomania, which included a plan to surrender to the Western Allies late in the war in order to pursue the fight against Russia unimpeded, caused Hitler to strip him of all his offices and order his arrest. Himmler attempted to slip out of Germany disguised as a soldier, but was caught by the British. And if we believe traditional history, he swallowed a cyanide capsule a day later. Himmler fought to maintain control right up until the time of his death. By committing suicide, once again, if you believe the traditional narrative, he not only commanded his own destiny, but he also died in the same manner as his Fuhrer. Göring brought Himmler to power, or assisted Himmler to come to power, and assisted in his retaining power. Bormann ultimately removed him from his leadership, but through his death, Himmler perceived himself as being in total control once more. No one could interfere with the decision he held between his teeth. It took him 45 years, but Himmler was finally a man in control of himself, if you believe the traditional narrative. Now, despite this accomplishment, Himmler remained the people pleaser who needed to be noticed rather than escaping the country and hoping to live out his remaining years undetected, say in Argentina where everybody else went. Himmler announced his identity and made a spectacle of himself, a victim of his own narcissism. Now, I don't think that a narcissist would possess the guts to kill themselves. I think that a narcissist, especially Heinrich Himmler, would have done just the opposite, would have done everything to try to stay alive so that all attention could remain on them as long as possible. Now, like I said, if you believe the traditional narrative, he commanded his own destiny. He died just like the Fuhrer did. He, took control of his destiny and took himself out. But I think there's enough evidence to at least throw a kink in that armor. I think there's enough evidence to say that maybe Himmler did not kill himself intentionally. Maybe he was forced to commit suicide by the British. In other words, he was killed by the British officers. We have it in a telegram that I just read to you just a minute ago that says, "We successfully intercepted HH last night. Before he could be interrogated, as instructed, action was taken to silence him permanently." That is a big, big revelation right there, and is a huge piece of evidence that can go far into saying that Heinrich Himmler did not kill himself, that he was, let's just say, forced to commit suicide by the British intelligence. And that's actually what I believe. Up until I've always wanted to do a piece on Heinrich Himmler, because I really think, and I will always think this, I believe, that he was the real evil behind the Nazi Party. A lot of the stuff that happened with the Fuhrer was the idea of Heinrich Himmler, and I think Hitler just went along with it. Like I said, Hitler was very laissez-faire in his leadership style. Himmler was just a born micromanager. He inventoried and cataloged everything. And I think that a lot of what Hitler needed could be found in Heinrich Himmler. And I think not only did Hitler recognize that, but he also just kind of let Himmler do his own thing. It was just like, yeah, whatever, go ahead and do it if you want to. So I really think that Himmler was the true evil behind the Nazi Party. I'm not saying that Hitler wasn't evil and that he didn't have a hand in all this, because he certainly did. But I really think if you had to compare the two of them, who was more evil, Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, I'm going to take Heinrich Himmler every time, because I just think he was the more sick, he was the more evil of the two. And that's my 2 cents. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's episode of ParaReality. Let me know what your ideas and thoughts about it are. Send me an email, sandman@parareality.com, or get in touch with me through one of my social media accounts. On Facebook, you can go to facebook.com/ParaReality, or look me up on Twitter at ParaRealRadio. That's facebook.com/ParaReality, or Facebook/ParaReality on Facebook.com, or ParaRealRadio on Twitter. Don't forget, you can also call the studio line at 615-692-1170. Don't forget to visit ParaReality.com. That's my website. Don't forget to visit that website often to keep up on the latest paranormal news from all around the world. I do have a paranormal news section on ParaReality.com, and that content is updated almost every day. So you can also shop in the ParaReality store. I've got some new merch. I got a brand new store, some new merch, and I'm in the process of adding a whole bunch of extra new stuff. There's, of course, the new logo design. There's new stuff to buy to show your support and your love of the ParaReality podcast. You can also click on the extras tab on ParaReality.com and watch some of the terrible videos that I've made for the show over the years. Man, they're horrible, but I have them up there for your viewing pleasure. Please feel free to make fun of them all you want, because I know they're horrible. And like I said, they're for your entertainment purposes. You can actually follow my social media accounts right at the bottom of the ParaReality.com homepage. Just scroll all the way down. And you'll see on one side there's my Facebook posts, and on the other side there are my Twitter posts. If you don't have Facebook, like, I don't know, if you don't have Facebook, are you alive? There's so many people that have Facebook, and like 95% of the world should have it. But if you don't have a Twitter account, I can understand that. But if you want to see my tweets, they are right there at the bottom of the ParaReality homepage. Social media is really where you can find out all about what's happening behind the scenes of the podcast here on ParaReality, because that's where I post a lot of interesting articles and show topics and other interesting stuff like my travels and my investigations and my thoughts and views on the world and stuff like that. ParaReality.com is really your one-stop shopping for everything that's happening in the world of the paranormal, especially here on ParaReality. So you've got paranormal news from all over the world on the website. You've got videos you can watch. You can follow my social media accounts there, shop in the store, and there's just all kinds of stuff for your entertainment there on ParaReality.com. Wow. ParaReality can also be heard on your favorite podcast platform. The show is available just about anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you have a smart speaker, you can listen there too. If you got any of the whatever your podcast of choice is, skills enabled on your smart speaker, all you have to do is say, play the ParaReality podcast, and bam, there you go. You are listening to ParaReality. Also, I have a Patreon account for the podcast, and I'd love it if you'd sign up to be a patron. There are 3 tiers of support, and all are extremely affordable, $5 a month or less. Each level offers exclusive content along with the ability to help create podcast episodes and even the chance to be a guest or a co-host on an episode of ParaReality. To learn more, head on over to patreon.com and look for ParaReality. Just go to patreon.com/ParaReality. 100% of the proceeds from Patreon goes back into producing quality content for this podcast. Of course, I make no money at this. It costs me money, and I would love to be able to keep it free to everyone. Of course, I would love to also if you're listening out there and you're looking for a unique paranormal podcast and you're willing to pay money for the host, I'm your dude. I would love to make money, but really I just do this because I love it. But, I would also love to be able to keep providing you with good quality content. And, Patreon is really designed to help content creators invest in keeping good quality content. So 100% of the proceeds from Patreon will go back into producing this podcast. I don't pocket any money. There's no money to be made. It's not like I'm going to get rich doing this anyway. There's a bajillion people out there who are doing podcasts. All of us want the same thing. We all would love to be able to be the next Joe Rogan. It's not going to happen. I know that. I'm realistic about it. But it would also be great if you could show your love and support for your favorite paranormal podcast, ParaReality. Like I said, I've got 3 tiers of support. They're all cheap, all extremely affordable, $5 a month or less, and each level offers you the ability to get exclusive content. And if you want to help create the show, you have the ability to do that as well for just a small monetary contribution. So if you can find it in your heart to help me support ParaReality, I would greatly appreciate it. If not, I'm still going to continue to bring you good quality content. Everyone, the next episode of ParaReality is going to be on Friday, August 21st at 8 o'clock p.m. Central U.S. time. I have a very special guest that I'm going to be interviewing. Her name is Amanda Woomer. She is from the website Spook Eats. If you have never heard of Spook Eats, head on over to spookeats.com. Check it out. She's going to be telling me all about what Spook Eats is, going to tell us about the books she's written, some of her travels and adventures. I've talked to her. She is an amazing person, and I am super excited to have her on the podcast. I was supposed to have her back in June, and due to a schedule mix-up that was entirely my fault, she could not make the appearance, so we had to reschedule, and she's going to be on Friday, August 21st at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Time. Make sure you please tune in, and find out. Oh, man, you know what? I am, on Sunday, I am going to be leaving for a week to go on vacation, and Mrs. Sandman wants to go to freaking Florida. I don't want to go to Florida because COVID-19, man, it's fucking Florida up. I don't want to go. She's determined that we're going to go to Florida. You see, Mrs. Sandman's parents have a beach house down in the Panhandle, and it's ours for a week. So she's been dying to go. She's already been down there once because she's furloughed, so she ain't got nothing else to do, right? She didn't catch COVID when she was down there earlier in the summer, so she wants to go back, and she wants me to go with her because, you know, she's Mrs. Sandman, and she wants Mr. Sandman to go down there with her. So we've had lots of discussions about it, and I'm going to do it because happy wife, happy life, right? So if I come back and I have the COVID, you heard it here first that I didn't want to do it. I've been coerced into going to Florida. We're going to try to be socially distant. We're going to wear our masks. We're not going to go out to eat. We're going to cook all our meals in the beach house, and we're just basically going to go down there and shelter in place, just in a different location at the beach. You know, I don't know what to do, but I'm going to carry some recording equipment, and I may do a podcast episode down there. You know, I recently talked to Mrs. Sandman into becoming a randonaut, and I downloaded the Randonautica app. And we went randonauting the other day. We did 4 randonaut adventures. And I had to say, you know, it was fun. There's, I could do a whole podcast on randonauting. It was fun. It is what it is. You know, you can say there's something to it. But you know, that's just how things go. But it's fun. And we plan on doing some randonauting while we're down in Florida, and see, you know, how our adventures go. So I'm going to carry some podcast equipment with me. I may or may not do a clandestine podcast episode from the beach. We shall see. Oh man, well, that about does it for this episode of ParaReality. I hope this podcast opens up your mind up to new ways of thinking, expands your consciousness, and produces a change in the way you see the world. If you wish to change, you must lift the veil of ignorance that has been cast over your eyes. Only then will you see the true power of the universe. I hope you have a wonderful evening, wonderful weekend, and I'll see you again on the 21st, hopefully COVID-free. Good night, everybody.
first lift the veil of ignorance that has been cast over your eyes.